This video showcases that Brazilian mythology extends well beyond the creatures featured in works like Sítio do Pica-Pau Amarelo. And there's nothing childish about it. In fact, some stories are quite macabre. And here are 7 more legends from each part or each region of Brazil. I know you love it when I bring videos talking about Brazilian mythology, legends, and gods. So I'm going to ask you to please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And the better the video does, the faster I'll bring more videos about Brazil, all right? Just like in part 1, the legends will be divided according to the regions of Brazil in the order of south, southeast, central west, northeast, and finally north. Starting now. Sanguanel is a kind of goblin that is present in the folklore of Rio Grande do Sul. He is said to have arrived in Brazil through the Europeans, more specifically because of the Italians. He is usually described as a small creature with red skin, or also wearing red clothes. From what I gathered, he usually doesn't do anything too serious, but of course he scares people a lot. He lives in the cliffs of the mountains, and his life is to steal children. He hides them at the top of trees or in the middle of the woods. As I mentioned, he doesn't do anything too bad to people except for kidnapping children, which is already very bad. But he doesn't mistreat them. He doesn't kill them, nothing like that. Actually, the children don't even remember much of what happens there because they stay in a state of drowsiness. Sanguanel just feeds them honey and water using a kind of leaf. And of course, the parents go out desperately looking for their missing son or daughter. Shortly after, they find the child at the top of a tree. Sanguanel usually returns the child without issues. But in other cases, he will only return the child if he gets a little honey in exchange. And the only thing the children can remember afterward is a red figure giving them honey or water. He rarely gets involved with adults, but when he does, he plays tricks on drunkards, lazy people, or those who don't go to church, and always without doing much harm. Among his powers seem to be teleportation, since he disappears and appears in different places, super strength, and control over fire. And from what I understand, it seems he has a twin sister named Sanguanela. I didn't find much about her, so I'm unsure if it's true. A nightmare is something that, since ancient times, humanity has tried to explain through the presence of an evil being, which could be an incubus, a demon, or a random, wicked spirit. For almost all peoples of the world, the nightmare was caused by a dwarf, a giant, or an old man, or a horrendous person who takes advantage of someone sleeping and sits on their belly or chest, pressing down on their torso, making it very difficult to breathe. In Portuguese and Spanish, Pisadeira comes from peso or pesado, meaning weight or heavy. In most other languages, the trace of the old supernatural tradition of the nightmare is preserved. And it is from Portugal that we received the legend of the Pisadeira. Pisadeira is a well-known creature in the São Paulo region and nearby areas of Minas Gerais. She is closely linked to that phenomenon of sleep paralysis, where the person can't move and sometimes even has difficulty breathing. Basically, she is also the personification of the nightmare itself. Usually, the Pisadeira is described as a completely bizarre witch, being a very skinny old woman with messy and disheveled hair, short legs, and a very long nose. Her fingers and nails are large, and her eyes are so red that they look like they're on fire. Her chin seems to be turned upwards, and her mouth is always open, showing her yellowish-green teeth. According to the legend, she walks on the rooftops at night, watching the people inside the house. And when she has the chance, she attacks, and usually that chance comes after dinner, when the person has a full stomach. At that moment, she will silently enter the house and go into the victim's bedroom. She climbs onto the bed and sits right on the person's chest, leaving them completely paralyzed. The worst part is that the person can see exactly everything that's happening. They're conscious, but unable to react at all, not even able to scream for help. Even though she looks very fragile because of her skeletal appearance, the Pisadeira has an enormous weight. In some accounts, people say they couldn't see the Pisadeira during the attack, only feeling her presence and her weight on top of them. Others say they could see everything that happened, including the witch's own bizarre appearance. And others say that while they were being suffocated by her, she would let out a bizarre laugh while looking at the terrified faces of her victims. The other people in the house couldn't see anything. They would only hear the victims scream when the attack was over. And the duration of the attack can vary from seconds, minutes, and even hours. There have even been deaths linked to the Pisadeira's attack, where the victims supposedly choked on their own vomit after having their stomach pressed by her. Since she feeds on fear, the chance of a second attack is always very high. This is a legend from the Bororó Indians of Mato Grosso. At first, it seems like one of those cute stories, but as time goes by, it gets more macabre, as you'll see. According to them, a long time ago, some women from a tribe went out to look for corn and took a boy with them. At one point, they discovered ripe corn ears. They took the corn, removed it from the cob, and started to mash it to make bread and cake for the men who had gone hunting. But the boy who had gone along took some of the corn, hid what he had made, and took everything to his hut. He gave the corn to his grandmother and asked her to make bread and cake herself so he could eat with his friends. His grandmother, of course, agreed, and when the bread was ready, he called his friends, and they all ate. And it's at this moment that the story starts to get a little strange. So that they wouldn't be discovered, the grandson and his friends tied his grandmother's arms and restrained her tongue. Then they cut the tongue of a parrot that was in the house and set free all the birds that were raised in the village. After doing all that, of course, they were very afraid of what would happen if their parents found out. They decided to escape to the sky. They went to the forest and called a hummingbird, gave him a rope, and told him to tie it to a vine. On the other end, he was meant to take it and secure it in the sky. The hummingbird followed the boy's request. As they began climbing the vine one by one, their mothers returned. Unable to find their children, they questioned the grandmother and parrot, but unsurprisingly received no answer. But one of the mothers saw a rope that reached all the way up to the sky, and on it there was a line of boys climbing up. She told all the other women, and together they ran into the woods. They begged their children to come back home with them, but of course, their pleas were not answered. The boys kept climbing the rope, and since there was nothing else they could do, the women went after them. The boy who had stolen the corn was the last in line, so he was the last to reach the sky. When he saw the mothers climbing the rope, he cut it. The women fell one after another, and when they all hit the ground, they turned into wild animals. And as punishment for all they had done, the children became stars that were forced every night to look down upon the earth, always seeing what they had done to their own mothers. João Galafus is a character in stories about the will-o'-the-wisp phenomenon in the Pernambuco, Alagoas, and Sergipe regions. The fire can be a sign of gold or of punishment, and it can also be the mysterious soul of someone who died without the waters of baptism. Galafus is the St. Elmo's fire, the sinister herald of deaths and storms. He comes out from the middle of the sea. He is strange, bluish, tall, the will-o'-the-wisp. The higher he is, the more he runs over the waves and lights up their foam, and then he simply vanishes, disappeared into nothing within the mysteries of the night. On the beaches of Pernambuco, they say he would be a kind of luminous goblin who is named after an indigenous man called João Galafus. The surname Galafus may have come from Africa, since the name usually used for this type of phenomenon is will-o'-the-wisp. In Alagoas, João Galafus or Galafões would be part of a gang of child kidnappers who roam around the houses, and when they find a child outside, they take them away. There is also Jandalafose, which is described in Câmara Cascudo's book as something very bright and luminous that chases after people. But in any case, these various names would symbolize the same thing, which can also be related to other creatures, such as Boitata, a being of fire that is also connected with the will-o'-the-wisp. Oniaina, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, is a part of the legends of the Tupari people who are from the Rondônia region, but it can also be present in other places, such as Bolivia. It is a creature described as gigantic, with huge boar tusks, And according to the legends, despite this monstrous form, he is actually a sorcerer who can transform into this creature, and his diet consists mainly of human flesh. Oniaina hunts anyone who is brave or foolish enough to enter the forest and take a walk alone. And his favorite prey is, of course, children. Once he captures his victim, he tears them to pieces with his fangs and devours everything, even crushing the bones. One story tells that on a certain day, children were running away from Oniaina. In desperation, they climbed trees and swung from one to another using vines, trying to escape. And Oniaina was right behind them, doing the same thing, until at one point a parrot saw what was happening and went to help the children. He cut the vine where Oniaina was holding on, and the monster fell to the ground and shattered, and its body turned into the reptiles and lizards that today inhabit the earth. But even with the monster gone, the children were very scared and didn't want to come down from the tree. In another tale, a monster chased a man through the open forest. This led to the monkeys that inhabit the area today. He was very close to him, so much so that at one point he even touched the man, tearing his skin. In his desperation, the man grabbed a vine from the forest floor and threw it up to the sky. And surprisingly, it got stuck in the air, forming a kind of ladder that reached all the way to the clouds. He started climbing it, but the monster, upon seeing that, went right after him. And again, the parrot appears, cutting the vine where Anu and Ima were holding on. And again, he falls to the ground and shatters. The Headless Mule is a legend that is famous all over Brazil, so that's why I decided not to place it as being from a specific region. It probably originated back in Portugal, at a time when mules were used as transportation for priests. In Hispanic regions, they also have similar legends like the Mule Dona. Her appearance can vary from region to region. She can be purple or black, with a white cross on her chest. She has an iron or silver horseshoe that makes a bizarre noise when she's galloping, which is much louder than any other horse. And even though she doesn't have a head, she can neigh or also make the sound of a woman crying. She can breathe fire through her nostrils despite not having any, and uses reins. According to the legend, a woman who gets involved with a priest ends up becoming the Headless Mule, as if it were a punishment for her sins. The transformation happens on Friday nights, when the mule would run wildly through the region, trampling everything in its path. When you see a headless mule, you should lie down on the ground and hide anything that shines, your nails, your teeth, and so on, to avoid being attacked. Or if you were very brave, you could try to remove its reins, breaking the curse, but in any case, at the third crow of the rooster, she would turn back into a human. Sticking a pin in her or tying her to a cross also prevents the transformation. But in the first case, it only works as long as the person who did it is alive and living in the parish where it was done. In the second case, the woman will stay in human form until dawn, but then she will start transforming again. The only way to break the curse for good is to remove her reins, but that will also only work as long as the person who did it is alive. And if the reins are put back on, the transformation will return as well. Once, Tupã and Ayanga were in a battle to see who would rule the world. The battle was pretty even, Ayanga with his fire and Tupã with his lightning. But at a certain moment, Tupã rose so high into the sky that it was possible to touch the stars. He conjured a lightning bolt using their power and threw it with all his strength at Ayanga, who was thrown into the underworld and became imprisoned there. Tise, who was a powerful sorceress and was in love with Ayanga, could not accept being away from him and asked Tupã to be placed together with Ayanga. And so it was done. But another sorceress who was watching everything would end up changing the whole story. Today's city in Brazil. Subtitles by Adriana Zanato.